The Clearwater Drives began in 1928 and continued through 1971. They were first organized by the Clearwater Timber Corporation, the predecessor of the present-day Potlatch Forests Incorporated. In 43 years, almost 2 billion board feet of timber was floated down the North Fork of the Clearwater to mills in Lewiston, Idaho. The drives along the North Fork and main Clearwater River took anywhere from 5 to 80 days, depending on the spring runoff and the distance, which ranged between 60 and 100 miles. The construction of Dvorak Dam on the Clearwater River in 1971 ended the Whitewater log drives. It was the last great river drive in the West. In the early years of the Clearwater River log drives, there were few machines to help with the heavy work. Loggers depended on the forces of water and gravity to move logs from the upper reaches of the drainage to the mills. High in the mountains, chutes and flumes were used to carry logs from the mountainsides to the rivers. Chutes are dry troughs made by placing two logs next to each other, or simply gouges in snow and ice, or occasionally bare earth. Log chutes without enough inclination had to be greased to help the logs slide. When chutes traversed long, relatively flat stretches of ground, horse trails were often built alongside the chute so horses could tow a string of logs through these sections. A running chute operated entirely by gravity, carrying logs down steep mountainsides at dizzying speeds to pile up on a landing or plunge into a body of water at the bottom. To reduce the speed of dangerous logs that could jump the chute, men were often stationed along steep pitches to shovel dirt on the chute. Flumes were wooden, V-bottom troughs carrying running water. They were fed by splash dams located high in the tributary streams. Some flumes covered up to 50 miles. The logs were skidded by tractors and decked along a flume so that they could be rolled in for a fast ride to the river. Many flumes were constructed to deposit logs in the middle of the river so that the current could carry them away. Once in the main stream of the river, most of the logs are swept downstream by the current. Some logs, however, got hung up on rocks and gravel bars, causing others to pile up and form log jams. The men who had the hard and dangerous job of breaking up the log jams and heading them downriver were called river pigs. The tools of their trade included peavies and long pike poles to pry the logs loose. Cork boots with rows of spikes in the sole provided safe, firm footing for working on round, rolling, wet, slippery logs floating in the water. River pigs had to be half acrobat and half daredevil. A strong back and quick feet were their only insurance. Log jams were a constant problem. Some jams backed up more than 20 million board feet of logs, damming water behind them. The danger came in having to work in front and at the bottom of the dam, freeing the logs that created the jam. Heavy wood boats called bateaux were used for hauling men downriver, working jammed logs back into the current, and rescuing men who fell into the river. When jams began to pull free, someone yelled, "She's hauling!" and the crew made a mad dash for the bateau. A floating cookhouse that accompanied the log drive was called the Wanigan. First used in 1931, it was built on a cedar pole raft which was 80 feet long by 22 feet wide. The steering sweeps, fore and aft, were used to guide the Wanigan through the Whitewater Rapids. The Wanigan preceded the crew down the river because the lumberjacks tended to lean towards the mill and work better when they knew the Wanigan was ahead of them. The yearly ritual of the Clearwater River log drives ended in 1971 when the construction of the Dvorak Dam on the North Fork turned miles of whitewater into Dvorak Reservoir. The last drive began when logs harvested from surrounding forest land the previous year were hauled to several large decking points along the river's bank. 51 million board feet of prime logs were stockpiled in decks 40 feet high and up to a half a mile long. The logs entered the North Fork of the Clearwater approximately 100 miles upstream from Lewiston. When the water reached the right level, the decks were tripped with skidding bulldozers or grapple cranes, setting off a chain reaction. Some logs not stacked in the long decks were flung into the river with a crane. Others were pushed in with log skidders. The bateaux of the 1920s and 1930s went through several changes, and by 1971 they evolved into jet-powered aluminum boats. They were powerful enough to travel against the current and were very useful for pulling jammed logs back into the current. The Wanigan also underwent major changes over the years. Air-filled rubber pontoons replaced the cedar pole rafts. The three sections included a cookhouse and two 16-man bunkhouses. The fore and aft 35-horsepower outboard motors maneuvered the Wanigan in the river. It required considerable skill to guide the 115-foot-long, 26-foot-wide Wanigan in the fast-flowing waters. The Wanigan was an essential part of the drive. The need for good food, and plenty of it, didn't change throughout the 40 river drives. Hard work in cold water made the crew legendary eaters. During the 1971 drive, the 34-man crew consumed 600 pounds of beef, 100 pounds of smoked ham, 80 pounds of pork, 80 pounds of bacon, 24 pounds of sausage, 35 pounds of fryers, 15 pounds of cheese. This was only a portion of the menu. Some things remained unchanged. Men with peavies and pike poles still had the cold, dangerous, and back-breaking job of muscling logs down the river to the mill. The scene of the roaring whitewater drives on the Clearwater is now inundated by the 51-mile Dvorak Reservoir. Trucks and trains have replaced the river as a means of hauling logs to the mill. A colorful and rugged era of logging history is over, but not forgotten.